In previous podcasts, I have talked about the understanding that is necessary to find and maintain better relationships. I've also talked about how you must develop yourself and earn these relationships. Today's question is, how do you actually find quality people? How do you find people who are growth-oriented, who are purposeful, who are valiant, who have self-knowledge and self-esteem, who are gentle and respectful with themselves and others, who can be part of a great support network, and who can provide inspiration on your own journey? Hello and welcome to Valiant Growth. My name is Philip Frey, and today I will be looking at the how-to of finding better people. More specifically, I will be looking at the filtering side, at red flags and at warning signs. The reason why I focus on this is because your social context will vary depending on who you are and where you live. So the actual how-to of finding people cannot be boiled down to a formula. Or maybe it can, but I haven't discovered it yet. A great place to look for people is Facebook groups, and as the community grows here at Valiant Growth, we will definitely have one. But at this point, I will leave actually meeting people up to you, and I will focus on filtering these people, on how to decide if you can become close friends, allies, which is something that I will address soon, the difference between those two, or whether you should avoid them completely. Before I begin, I must stress the fact that, as said in the previous podcast, you must first develop the skills and virtues within you that will enable you to earn better people. And filtering plus self-development will take place at the same time as your growth gains momentum, but at the beginning, it's best to focus on one of the two. Depending on your environment, you have to decide which one is more timely for you. I started with filtering because the idea of earning relationships was something that I discovered later, and where that led me was a place of loneliness. I had severed all my contacts because most of them didn't meet my standards, but since I couldn't offer much better, that left me in a pretty lonely place at the time. And that was a long time, about a year, when I had very little in terms of friends and outside contacts. I of course had people that I worked with, but as far as my inner world went, I really only had my therapist to discuss it with. And I'm in a phase right now where I'm extending my social circle. Now, depending on how much risk you're willing to take and how you feel about temporary loneliness, you might choose to play it safe, work on your skills and virtues, and make the process more gradual, or you may go ahead and choose solitude, the solitude in which you will grow. That is an approach that works for some people, and it has worked for me as well. But the truth is that developing and struggling with developing these skills and virtues is the best way to see if someone else has them or is working on them. For instance, it's easy to say that I'm looking for self-esteem in people, but unless you've done your own work, it might be hard to see. It might be easy to confuse with pseudo-self-esteem, and it will also be difficult to see people who are not there yet, but who are doing the work, which is in many ways a good place to be in. Also, as said in the previous podcast, even if you do find these people somehow, because you don't already have a base of value developed, they might simply not be interested. Now, they might take a risk. They might say, okay, I see that this guy is really trying and he's not there yet, but he's growth oriented. And I love people who are growth oriented. So I will take a risk with this guy. But they might also say, hey, let's see how this goes and let's return to it in half a year. Now, not all people have this inner dialogue consciously when they're considering having new friends, but most people will have it in some unconscious form. So it's good to have something to offer in a trade before you look for buyers. Now, the reason why you must focus on filtering and red flags at all and make it something very conscious is because of the state that the world is in today. When it comes to recognizing destructive traits as being destructive and dangerous, in many ways progress has gone backwards in the last decades. And there has been a lot of heroization of behavior and traits that were commonly understood as undesirable before. And this is done partly to get votes, because some of these subgroups that I'm going to talk about are very active in voting. Also, if you're producing mainstream movies and books and content in general, some people will go towards pandering because that sells very well. Now, there's a strong reaction to the heroization happening in some communities as we speak. And there's this idea that being, say, a single mother or someone with a very tumultuous series of romantic relationships, or being broke and on welfare, has somehow become cool in today's society. I don't think that is really true. Were it true, there wouldn't be this great push and continuous propaganda about how these people are heroes or they're super cool or they're the best. If this was something commonly understood, there wouldn't be a continual stream of pandering happening. You don't see a lot of articles on top 5 reasons why climbing Mount Everest is actually pretty cool, or the top 10 overlooked advantages of owning a Ferrari. I think people are still well aware that these behaviors are destructive, and they soothe their gap in self-esteem with all these movies and articles and speeches. That is why they exist. So in addressing this problem, I think a lot of empathy and understanding is necessary. So the reason why I'm bringing this up is that I don't think the propaganda has convinced you that the people and the kind of traits that I'm going to talk about are cool and you have to change that. What is more common is that there's an enforced silence around the subject. So if you think that single mothers are not doing something that's particularly good, or if you think that very promiscuous people aren't actually living a life of many benefits, you might have an internalized voice telling you that you should keep your opinion to yourself. Or if you consider befriending someone like this, you might have an internalized voice telling you that, no, I have to overcome my doubt. I have to be more open. I have to be more progressive. That is where the propaganda comes in, and that is where you have to be really mindful and make sure that you're not forming a relationship out of shame, out of duty, out of guilt, out of a desire to save someone, but you're doing it because it is a mutually beneficial win-win adult relationship. Also, when talking about filtering, I'm mostly thinking of close friends here, as I said, and not allies. And this will be defined in a future podcast, but for now, some working definition might be: a close friend is someone who you integrate into your support network. Let's say someone you can call up in the middle of the night, and someone who can call you up in the middle of the night and reasonably expect some kind of support or help. I think there's an appropriate level of how high you set your standards for different relationships. While it might be cool to have them all with really great people, there are situations where it's simply not necessary, and I don't think it damages your integrity to have a relationship with your local grocer or your tennis instructor or someone who's also into board games, if these people are not exactly a virtuous, in-growth kind of people. You can have one common point that unites you, and basically you don't have to care about the rest. If they're not dangerous, if they're not a huge risk, you don't have to care about the rest. All you have to care about is being really aware of the fact that this person doesn't meet criteria for friendship, and therefore you must keep appropriate bounds between you and not get closer than what is appropriate within that relationship. For instance, I don't recommend talking about really emotional and personal things at your workplace, especially if it is people you haven't chosen and you have no control over choosing or firing or in general working with. I would keep that very cordial, but be very careful to keep the boundaries. Now that said, the core principle of filtering, of forming a valid judgment about people, and there's nothing wrong with doing that, is that relevant past behavior will continue into the future unless there is significant change, unless there is significant work, self-work having taken place that might alter that tendency. People say that they have changed all the time, but as you build experience in actually changing and growing, you will understand just how difficult it is to create new habits, to create new behaviors, to recognize painful trauma, pain inflicted upon you and the others around you, by you. You will recognize how grueling and time-intensive process it is. So when someone tells you, oh, I've changed a lot since then, and you very gently ask them, okay, what have you done? What has worked for you? And they don't have an answer. They just say, well, it's different now. I'm older now. I'm more experienced now. That is, I wouldn't buy that. It might be that there's no change at all, and this person is just delusional, or it might be that there has been some kind of willpower-centered change where they forced through that behavior for the moment, but that is a very fragile base to build upon, where there's no self-knowledge around the behavior, and in any given moment when their willpower gets overwhelmed by stress, fatigue, etc., that control system will collapse and they will go back to their old behavior. Think of smoking, for instance. How many people quit smoking only to return to it in a very stressful situation? And that is because they haven't looked into the roots of what they were trying to cure with smoking and finding alternative means to soothing. Because that fragile base is not there, at any point the smoking can resume. And smoking is a pretty inoffensive thing to people around you. I know secondhand smoking, but still, there are things that are worse than that. For instance, if someone has anger issues, but all that's holding it back is willpower and determination, let's just say you don't want to be around that person if you can avoid it. So let me begin with an easy example here. What if someone is broke. And I'm not referring here to a level of income or a level of consumption, though that can be relevant as well. At the moment, I'm living on half a minimum wage here in the UK, so for me it would be pretty inappropriate to make friends with a millionaire, because they might say, hey, you know what, this weekend let's go to the Bahamas, and that means that my 4-month budget has just been annihilated. That kind of relationship is going to have problems. So it's important to find friends who are around the same level of consumption, yes, but what is even more important is kind of a net worth approach, in the sense of, if you sum up everything they own and compare it to their debt, what number do you get? And I don't remember the exact statistics, but save up 3 months worth of minimum wage and have no debt, and you're already ahead of 60 or 70% of the population here in the UK. Being broke is more about how much resilience you don't have financially, how much risk you're taking. Being broke is about maintaining a level of consumption that is unsustainable and that can collapse at any point. Maintaining a level of consumption fueled by debt and irresponsibility, being inappropriate about money. Now, having someone like that as a close friend is a massive, massive risk for your support system. It's only a matter of time until that person will need your financial help. It's guaranteed. And it's very unlikely that A, he or she will be able to use the money you lend to her one time and then fix everything and it never occurring again. It's also very unlikely that you can rely on them when you're in trouble. So it's a pretty bad element in a support system, in a support network. So even if your income levels are not the same, you can work around that. You have to be sure that any person you accept in your circle of close friends is financially stable. And also your knowledge of personal finances doesn't have to be the same. A great guy on personal finance, a great podcaster, is Joshua Sheets at Radical Personal Finance. Now, could I be friends with him? Well, his knowledge of personal finance exceeds mine considerably, and if you want to learn, I absolutely recommend listening to him. But, given that I'm pretty stable, I'm pretty frugal, I could be friends with him. I believe it. And Joshua, if you're listening to this, contact me. Let's be friends. No, I'm just joking. And I could be friends with him because I would not bring a lot of extra risk into the system. You get to even a beginner's level of understanding in personal finance, I think you'll be pretty safe from that point on. Now, something that's a little bit more controversial and more challenging, and also more important, is, as a red flag, poor past or present relationships. So if you meet someone who has abusive, dissociated, stuck friends, past or present, romantic relationships, past or present, familial relationships, past or present, with no history of a massive change and all the work associated with that, very likely that person will pose a similar level of risk to your emotional stability if you accept them in your support network as someone who is broke to your financial stability. People who are associated with groups known for not being big on self-knowledge or growth. People who have a tumultuous dating history. Single moms. Adult children who were abused in the past or neglected, which is also abuse, who still maintain contact with their unrepentant parents. They're all risky friends to have. And if you actually recognize yourself as someone on this list, you can get out of these relationships, or you can stay in them. It's up to you. It's absolutely possible, though, to improve what you can bring to the table. And it's absolutely possible to really change from your history. But at the moment, you are a risky choice. And when it comes to single moms, the choice is not really present. Well, it is present, but abandoning your children, which would be the choice, is, of course, a horrible option. And because of the moral obligation that comes with being a parent, it would obliterate your self-esteem, probably irredeemably, to make that choice. You can still, however, make massive improvements within that context. You have made a mistake, and I have no problem in claiming that it is a mistake to become a single mom. It is a mistake that you must take responsibility for, but you can absolutely improve your value as a potential friend within this context. And I will not go into too much detail into this in this podcast, but I think growth is something that nobody is excluded from. Now, if you are a single mother right now, or if you're broke, or if you had 10,000 sexual partners in the past, you can absolutely work from that context. You must recognize that your value as a friend will be diminished by this. Either the risk profile that you're offering, so for instance, I think promiscuity is a sign of massive trauma. Therefore, I would be cautious to be friends with someone who has had this behavior in his or her past. Now, if there has been massive growth, that's different, but I would still be a little bit more careful. Now, if you're a single mom, you are very needy in the present, and there's not a lot of support you can give, and that automatically makes you a less valuable member of a support network. There's just no way around that. But you can work to improve your value on other ends where you have control. You can work to become someone who has a lot of courage, who has a lot of purpose, who is a great parent, who has a lot of empathy, who has really worked through her trauma, who has really gained self-knowledge, who has great support skills, and that might counterbalance it. Oh, and when I say single moms, I use it because single fathers are pretty rare in our society, but everything that I said still applies to them as well. So, getting back to the main thread, redemption is absolutely possible, but it takes a lot of work, and that leaves a trace. It leaves more than a trace. It should be written all over the person, in their face, in their tone of voice, in their body posture. You have to see it. You have to see it in how they speak. You have to see it in their history. You have to see it in the things that they say. It's unavoidable. So when someone claims change, but you can't see it, and there's no story behind it, don't believe it. Just, it's not worth the risk. Great forms of work are therapy, journaling, or some other way of gaining self-knowledge. I also think a good sign is someone ending a lot of relationships in the near past. I believe that is an unfortunate but absolutely necessary thing to do. When you get into self-knowledge, you will see that there are a lot of people who you're in contact with who are not willing to join you or support you on this journey. So you will usually see that happening as well 3 virtues that I look for that are my key core virtues are courage, someone who actively seeks to find, accept, and overcome areas of fear where that is not self-destructive. Morality, which is for me someone who respects property rights, who doesn't use or condone force against peaceful individuals, and who honors his or her promises to their best ability. And purpose, which is having professional, intellectual, and relationship goals and systems, and having some visible success in achieving them. These are the most important things to me, and they must absolutely be matched when I'm looking for a friend. Of course, I have a lot of my own growth to do in these things, and I work on it every day. Now, you must clarify what is really important to you, which virtues you find most important, most essential, closest to who you are. Now, I told you about these 3 virtues, but I actually have a list containing 11 virtues at this point. But looking at 11 virtues when you meet someone is pretty overwhelming, so it's easier for me to focus on the ones that are key. And you must develop, clarify, and work on your own virtues and use them as an evaluation system for others. Another red flag is mysticism and irrationality in thinking. If you meet someone who is mystical and irrational, or anti-rational in the sense that philosophically they believe that there's either no truth or no reality, no objective reality, or that it is impossible to discover for human beings, this will not only cause you a lot of problems in a potential relationship, but it is also a sign of unhealed trauma. We are born empiricism and logic machines. Of course, we also develop some of these skills as we grow up, so I wouldn't put a baby in charge of the Science Institute, but we are geared towards developing these things. We look at our environments and we believe what we see and we seek to find answers. The idea of believing without evidence, the idea of authority or emotions trumping logic, is something that a child must absolutely be traumatized into. Their growth must be blocked. And because this is the case, irrationality correlates with other problems, also caused by trauma, behavior problems, health issues, etc. I personally am an atheist, and I have no problem saying that religion has no case going for it in either empiricism or reason. It actually is the opposite of empiricism and reason. That said, I do know many religious people who would make great parts of a support system, who are very nice people, who are even very self-knowledgeable people, and they might not use the term, but through prayer, through, say, using the Bible as a tool for reflection, they can become people who are very valuable as friends. There's also a difference between people who believe dogmatically versus people who actively question their faith, actively question the reasons behind their faith, and that keep researching and digging into it to find better answers. And I know people like that. Now, how that doesn't lead to atheism is something that's mystifying to me, and that's a good question. But regardless, there is a difference in quality there. And you might consider having a friend who is religious just because there are many benefits associated to certain kinds of groups within religious communities, groups that are very focused on good parenting, on self-knowledge, though they call it differently, on being supportive, on justice, on morality, on honor. In fact, whenever I do a Google search on a moral question, they are the only guys discussing these things on a large scale. There's nobody else who is even interested in it, and that is something that makes them very valuable. Like one day I was curious, is it a right thing to listen to pirated music on YouTube where the uploader is clearly not the artist? Is that okay? Is that wrong morally, or is that right? I put that into Google. It was all christianthis.com, christiandad.com, friendsofvirtueofjesus.net. That was old, and they were the only people who were interested in it, and atheists were nowhere to be seen. They're often amoral and cynical when it comes to morality. It's a case of throwing out the baby with the bathwater. So consider that when it comes to irrationality. I guess you have to weigh the costs and benefits on this one. If you have better alternatives, I would suggest, like if you have the same person, but in one case he's religious and in the other case he is not, I'd absolutely choose the not. But you have to look at your context, you have to look at what is available to you and go with it. Now, when it comes to dogmatic people or people who have never thought about the subject but are blind followers, I would not ever have someone like that in my group of close friends. Simply because there's nothing that can be so valuable in that person that it will balance out that level of irrationality. Also add to that, if their parents traumatizing their children with hell, it's over. It's not possible to grow around a person like this. Also, again, you might consider having Christian, and I say Christian because to most of my listeners that will be the most relevant. I don't know a lot about other religions. So you might consider having Christian allies rather than close friends. It's really up to you. Another red flag is immoral or dissociative occupations. Without going into too much detail, I would never be friends with a politician, a crony capitalist, someone who has a really scammy sales kind of occupation. Not that all sales are scammy. Subgroup. These are all occupations that are immoral, and if you can do this for 40 to 60 hours a week, that's a problem. Also, there are occupations that are not necessarily immoral, but there's a lifestyle around that necessitates a great level of dissociation. If the Wolf of Wall Street is true, for instance, if that is a realistic representation of what goes on the stock market, I would be wary of being friends with a stockbroker. I would also be wary of being friends with a prostitute. Not immoral, raises a lot of questions. Another red flag that you might consider is someone belonging to collectivist political ideologies, and this goes full spectrum, so anywhere from communist, socialist, nationalist, green. All of these are fundamentally collectivist ideologies versus individualist ideologies. And the problem here is that people who are attracted to this, don't believe in self-responsibility. A big thread running through these political ideologies is that the individual is not responsible to what is happening to them. It is some kind of external force that must be fought, be it capitalists, Jews, the other country, free trade, whatever, destroyed their jobs, like that kind of thing. There is no responsibility assumed, and people like that will not be interested in growth. This is in fact the best way of avoiding growth, blaming someone else. You can never have growth or self-esteem without self-responsibility. And the other thing is that people who want the government to take care of them, well, they will say others, but it always includes them as well. People who want to do that have fundamentally never become adults, or they don't see other people as adults, and they don't want other people to become adults. Because being dependent on someone for your basic existence or some very core needs is something that's only appropriate for a child. So these people are looking for a parental figure, and because they never got their needs met in their childhood, they are forever looking for a parental figure. And this is not only socialists and communists, where it's clear that, yeah, they want the nanny state and they want to cling on the breast of the state forever, or they want other people to do that. It's also more righty style ideologies where they're seeking purpose and connection through joining some kind of movement, some kind of collective identity, where they are so deficient of self-esteem and a sense of purpose that they can only feel good by assuming an identity and assuming the successes of other people. America is the best country in the world. I am American, therefore I'm a great person. That's the logic behind that. Someone who is healthy and who has self-respect doesn't want his or her main achievements to be coming from someone else. They want to generate their own value. And this is why I would be on the lookout for this kind of behavior, these kinds of beliefs. In summary, a list of things to look out for: financial irresponsibility, immaturity, unstable relationships, unenlightened friends, family or partners, mysticism and irrationality, immoral or dissociated occupations, collectivist political ideologies, and I'm sure you already have some more ideas on the subject. And the principle you have to keep in mind whenever looking and evaluating someone is the principle that people can change, but unless there's a lot of work, a lot of change, and very significant evidence of that change, unless that is present, you can expect relevant past behavior to go on forever in the future. Thank you for listening to the Value and Growth podcast, and I dare you to flourish today. If you enjoyed today's show and found value in it, don't keep all that value to yourself. Identify those of your friends who are most interested in this kind of material and give it to them.